on this computer. All right, everyone. Welcome to Running a Realm Practice by Journeyman Laeta. I will now let Laeta take over. We have an hour from 11 to 12 p.m. Mountain Standard Time.
Sweet. Thank you, Squire Antoinette. This is Running a Realm Practice. Little background knowledge about why I might possibly be required or allowed to teach this page. Sven, can you stop sharing your screen? Thank you. Why I might be allowed? I was the leader of my realm of Kamigawa, which is a small realm which hosts less than 20 people on a usual practice, closer to 10 to 15. For 2 years, I was running that realm, and I am also a professional elementary teacher. So when I'm thinking about running a practice, I think about it in the lens of a teacher. So I'm going to be referencing terminologies and explaining them as I go that are teacher terms. If I say something and I make an assumption that everybody knows what it means, please stop me and be like, we don't know what that means. And I will then explain it in more greater detail. This is a thought I have rants. And one of the rants I have is how practices are ran and how to effectively run them. So this was a 5-minute rant I had, and I did on a Facebook Live session one day. And then when Journeyman Alina asked if I would teach a class, and asked for me to teach one I hadn't taught before, I went, well, maybe I will expand my 5-minute rant into a more cohesive thought line. So when we're running a realm practice, I focus on engagement. That's the key word I'm going to be using this whole time I'm talking at you, is engagement. Engagement means the most number of people actively participating who are going to participate. So in a classroom setting, that's all of my students doing what they're supposed to be doing. It looks different in a realm practice setting because not everyone at a realm practice is a fighter. The majority of the time, they are fighters, but you also have your non-combatants who come to a realm practice. So you need to come up with ways that will keep both your fighters engaged and your non-combatants engaged as well. And we'll talk about that in more extensive detail in a little bit later. But that engagement, so whenever I look at a field during a practice, the question I ask myself is how many people are engaged in what is happening. If I'm looking at a field and I see a bear pit going on, I see 2 people engaged, I might see a handful of people in line, and then I'm going to see the majority of the participants at the practice sitting on the sidelines, which is the exact opposite of engagement. They are disengaged on what is happening in the field. They are not invested in the practice if they're sitting on the sidelines. There's a time and place for sitting on the sidelines, but that's not what I'm looking at when I'm running a practice. So I personally do not recommend a bear pit or king of the hill or whatever your realm phrases it as, but the situation where you just have a line of fighters, 2 people fighting at one time, and then one person stays and the other goes to the back of the line. Because what that is at that moment, that is 2 people engaged, and those are the 2 people who are fighting who are engaged. The people in the line are waiting, so they are not actively engaged in the process. So 100% of the time, rather than doing a barrel pit as a formal practice activity, I would switch to something that involves everyone on the field actively doing something, not waiting. So when I would run my practices of Kamigawa, I would always open our practice with a Valhalla, which was, just to clarify in case people use different terminologies, all the fighters are on the field fighting at the same time, everyone for themselves. When you die, you touch a specified object or specified tree, you come back to life and you fight again until you die again. But what that does is it's a great beginning of practice activity because as people are coming to the park or your practice location, they're able to put on their equipment, do those stretches, get warmed up, and then join the field and use that Valhalla as a time to get everyone who's going to be at practice, and without a waiting time of, well, I'm here, now I have to wait for an event to get started. So by able to have a Valhalla, you get 100% of the people who are on field are fighting the entire time they are on the field. They're not sitting there in a line waiting like in a barrel pit. So that to me is an effective engagement because I see everyone on the field is fighting. Usually at the beginning of practice, we don't have a lot of, if you have something for people to jump into right away, like a Valhalla game, then you won't have a lot of people sitting on the sidelines wondering what to do or when's practice going to start, because they obviously see, there is something for me to do. Similar technique that we use in a classroom situation where the moment students walk into a classroom, you want an assignment ready for them to begin on. The moment someone shows up to your practice, you want something for them to do. Not just sit and wonder, well, when's practice gonna start? I don't wanna fight, guys. So by having a Valhalla, it allows everyone to be engaged at the same time. Now, a key thing you're doing is whenever you're doing an activity, you want to be looking to stop the activity before people get bored with it. So there's a sweet spot that you want to be looking for. It's when everyone is having fun, they're 100% engaged, but then after you do one activity for a certain amount of time, which will depend on the day and who your participants are that day, at some point, people will start dropping out of the activity. So what this looks like is if we're doing a line fight, and we've been line fighting a while, and then people start dropping off, they're gonna go take a water break, they're just tired, they're disengaged from the activity, and they leave the line fight and they go and sit down at the side. Now that's the clue to me as a facilitator or a teacher that I am now losing my engagement. My participants are choosing to stop doing the activity I'm orchestrating and go and disengage and do something else on their own. I don't want that to happen. So what I want to look for is I want to find that time when everyone's fully engaged, and right before people would stop drifting off to do something else, I want to stop the activity. I want to stop it while they are still having fun, so that their memory at the end of practice isn't that, man, we did a lot of line fights and it just got kind of repetitive and boring. But the memory was, man, that was a great practice. I had such a great time doing line fights, and then we switched and we did a scenario battle, and there was just, the whole practice was full of super cool things. So what I like doing in my realm, and it's such a teacher thing. So you may not want to do it, but I give, I'll do a thermometer and I'll do show me how many more with your fingers. So such a teacher thing. Again, I'm an elementary school teacher, but I like it because it gives me information I can then use. So if we're doing a line fight, I'll ask people, I'll just straight up ask my participants how much fun they're having, and I'll phrase it this way. I'll say, show me if you want to do 1 more line fight, 3 more line fights, or 5 more line fights. And they just show me on the finger, and I'll have people who be like, give me 10 more, and they just never want to stop. I'll have people, but usually most of them will choose a range of the numbers I've given them. And that allows me as the facilitator of the practice to gauge how much fun they're having and when's an appropriate time to switch. I'll also do a thing of showing with a thermometer, like, are you guys having fun? Do we want to switch to something else? This is a terrible day and you just want to go home. I don't use this as much. I use this a lot more with when I'm introducing a new activity. But for when to switch activities, I gauge my participation by you want to do 1 more, 3 more, 5 more? Is my favorite way to gauge it. You can also just walk up and ask them if you don't want to sound like an elementary school teacher and ask for numbers to be raised. And there are verbal cues you'll see. If they are taking longer to get set up for the next fight, rather than just immediately standing up and going to the lines, that might be a cue that they're beginning to become disengaged from the activity. If there's a lot more banter happening, that might be a cue that they're beginning to become disengaged. You have to know your realm and know what's the normal level of banter and how quickly you can expect them to transition from the end of a line fight to the beginning of another line fight. So, but usually at my Kamigawa practice, when I ran it, we would begin with a Valhalla, 100% engagement on the field all the time. Then we would transition to a line fight. And when you're going to line fights, you have to think about how can I engage the fighters who are choosing not to fight today for whatever reason, and my normal non-combatants. So there are some roles in the field that can be filled by non-fighters. The most immediate one that comes to mind is marshalling. It's always a good idea to have an official marshal on the field, even if you're just doing a small practice, because it gives people who have less experience marshalling that experience of how to do it, so that when they go to larger practices or events, they might feel more comfortable volunteering to marshal for some time. And it teaches them what to look for and pay attention to on a field. You can also do things like designated new person. So if you have a non-combatant or a combatant who's choosing not to fight, you can ask them if they would be the designated point of contact for anyone who walks up on the field that day interested in what's going on. So they would be the person who goes and says, "Hi, this is Belgov, blah, 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 blah. Do you want to join us?" And walks them through how to get up on the field. And I have a whole other rant about helping new people become integrated in a practice. But that's one way to keep your non-combatants engaged, is to ask them to marshal, to ask them to be kind of the promotional face for your practice for that day, or to just encourage them to like take pictures with the phones and stuff. And now you have a social media presence and you can post those on your social media and be like, "Hey, we did practice today. Hope you guys were there too." And so that will keep your non-combatants engaged while the field is happening. But again, most of your people who show up to a Belgoth realm are going to be combatants. They're going to be there to fight. So I've already talked about, we start with 100% participation with a Valhalla game. And then my realm always transitioned to a line fight. And we're looking for that sweet spot between when they are bored of the line fight and they want to do something else. And we want to switch the activity right before we get to that point, so that we always have that excitement and engagement. So once you switch the activity, you have two options. If people are getting bored, you can either take a water break, which on hot days in July and August is a great option. And water breaks are a great transitional point, because then it allows the leader to meet with either the team members or with the participants in the practice and kind of fill out what people want to do. And then you can switch to a different activity. So this is when we get to the complications that fighters are not homogeneous group. They don't all want the same thing. Different fighters want different things. It's a heterogeneous group. So you need to be able to meet those different needs. So my realm Kamigawa is located in Idaho, and many of our fighters who've been fighting for a while just love doing line fights. A lot of them would be happy just doing line fights all day long. But if you talk, I know from experience of when I was a newer fighter, and I know from talking to our newer fighters, that a less experienced fighter doesn't just want to do a line fight all day long, because they die within 5 seconds. It's not fun for them. So what you need to provide for your newer fighters to retain them is you need to give them an activity that has an objective to it, something beyond kill your opponent, because they have been fighting for 1 day, 2 weeks, a month, and are not able to kill the person who's been fighting for 5 years, 7 years, a decade. But if you give them an objective and say, hey, we are going to play Ring the Bell. To win this game, you don't have to kill so-and-so. You just have to hit the shield. Hey, we are going to play Capture the Flag. To win this game, you don't have to kill. You just have to go capture the flag. Or, hey, we're playing a game that has refresh. Once you die, you can go, you can touch that tree, and you can come back to life. And it allows that new fighter to not feel defeated. And whenever someone feels unable to complete a task well, they will disengage from that activity. In the classroom, this comes out with behavior problems. In a foam fighting experience, it can also come out as a behavior problem. Someone might get angry and have an anger fit on you. They might just choose to leave practice because they feel defeated and they feel like they can't do anything. Both of those options, you don't want anyone yelling at you and you don't want your people to leave your practice, are things you want to avoid. So the way you avoid it is you give them activities that they can engage in. So what I usually did when I was running practice was I had my Valhalla. We did line fights to get everyone going and allow for that adjustment of we're doing a practice. And then I would switch to an objective-based game. Something that would still be fun for my veteran fighters and would also give my newer fighters something they could latch onto and achieve, an achievable goal. So I'm a fan of Ring the Bell, which gives my experienced fighters who just want to fight, they can just fight, but my people who need that objective now have the objective to go and hit. You can also do any kind of timed ones, see how long you can last on the field, you get so many refreshes, capture the flags. Those are hosts of objective-based games, many of which begin with a line fight format, which appeases your more experienced fighters who just want to do line fighting, but gives our lesser experienced fighters something they can focus on and achieve. So again, we're looking on that engagement. I have now engaged my veteran fighters by giving them a fight, and I've engaged my newer fighters by giving them an objective that they can obtain. So we play that game, we play the scenario battle, we play the objective-based game, and again, I'm looking for that sweet spot of end the activity right before they get bored. But I need to pause and talk about how to prevent frustration when you're doing a scenario or an objective or a game of any kind. Or even just line battles. If you have a ton of new people on your field and you're doing a line battle, you also need to go through this process. And what it is, and your old fighters will find it annoying and your new fighters will love you, but it's for the best, is you want to make sure there's no confusion about how the game is played. You don't want to assume your newer fighters know how to play this game. Now, if you know for a fact that everyone on your practice knows how to play it, you don't have to go through this. But even if you have 2 or 3 newer fighters, I would recommend going through this. And what you do is same thing as I do in the classroom. Whenever I begin an activity, I explain what the goal is. We're playing Ring the Bell. The way you win this game is by someone from your team hitting a shield that's positioned over here with their sword. That's the goal. You explain what the rules are. It's conducted exactly the same way as a line fight. We have 2 separate teams. They square up after each other. You die the same way. And you kill the same way. But your goal is to ring the bell. If there's any changes. In this particular scenario of Ring the Bell, you are going to have 3 lives. Once you die, put your weapon on your head so everyone knows you're dead, stay dead, and then go and touch the herald or go to a designated field, count to 3, and you're back to life and you can join your team again. And that's about, and then I immediately go into, are there any questions? And if I have a vast majority of fighters on my field who are new, I will ask them to re-explain what I just said. So I would ask them, what's the objective of the game? How do you die when we're playing this game? How many respawns do you get? How long do you have to wait before you respawn? And exactly like that. That way I, as the facilitator, know there's no confusion. So no one's gonna get frustrated because they don't know how to play the game. And none of our experienced fighters are going to get frustrated with our new people because they think the new people are breaking the rules, when in reality, the new people just didn't know how to play the game. It can feel tedious to people who already know the game, and they'll look at you and they're like, why are you explaining this so long? But I can say from experience that when I've walked through this process and while playing the game, it goes smoothly and there's no complications. And then I've watched other people running practices who have a significant amount of new people at the practice, and they do not walk through this process. They just give their rundown of how you play the game, and they don't pause and ask for questions and make sure there's clarification. They then have to stop in the middle of the game and re-explain it all, because all the new people had misconceptions about how to play the game. So by taking those 5 minutes before you begin the activity to clarify and make sure there's no misconceptions, you have higher engagement during the activity because people feel like they know what to do and they know how to do it. So again, that keyword of engagement, clearing misconceptions increases engagement. So at this point in Kamigawa's practice, we would have begun with Valhalla, 100% engagement, everyone on the field. We would have transitioned to a line fight, ended it at the timing, well, right before everyone's bored, transitioned to a scenario battle for my newer fighters so they feel like they have something they can achieve to keep their engagement in my sport. And at this point, I would usually transition back to a line fight. I would assess my participation for this week and decide if I would want to do just a basic line fight, or I could do a line fight with a twist, such as I'm a fan of Goblin Evolution, where everyone begins with a single blue, and the losing team gains 1 piece of equipment each round. So that allows something to always be changing on the battlefield that increases engagement because people have to pay attention, and the setting doesn't stay the same. They're not fighting the same person again and again and dying every single time. But they may have a shield the next round while the opponent is still stuck with only 1 sword. And it allows that engagement. We keep mixing things up to maintain that engagement of everyone on the field. If you notice people are starting to go and sit down and take long water breaks, that's a clue that you need to change something that's happening on the field to get them back up and participating in the activity. So we've gone from 100% engagement with Valhalla to a line fight, ended the line fight right before everyone got bored, moved to scenario battle or an objective-based game, to a line fight or variation on line fights, ended it right before everyone got bored. And at this point in Kamigawa's practice, we're usually, the sun's starting to set, we're getting ready to go home. So what I do is I go back to a game, not usually Valhalla, but a setup is similar to Valhalla. Well, we don't have teams necessarily. It's everyone for themselves, and everyone on the field is fighting the whole time. Again, I am not a fan of barrel pitting or King of the Hill because we only have 1 or 2 people engaged at a time and everyone else is waiting in line. So rather than ending your practice with a barrel pit, which will have a faster time of people just leaving, because why stay and wait in line when I could just go home and eat dinner, I would end with a game, independent focused game. Some of the ones Kamigawa uses a lot is necromancer, where you have zombies and townspeople, and the townspeople have to figure out who the necromancer is and kill them, and that's how they win. But you don't know who's the necromancer, so it's 1v1, everyone against themselves. Or we'll do fetch, where you have a sword or a bandana or something, and whoever has the bandana, everyone has to go and kill them, and then once they're killed, someone else tries to go and grab the bandana, and it's almost like a game of tag. But again, you have everyone engaged at all times, and anyone on the field is fighting the field. And you, as the leader of the realm, or whoever was running the practice that day, should have a deep enough knowledge of your population to know what types of games will appeal to your fighters. So that's how I do it. Again, you're always looking, how many of my people are on the field right now? How many are off the field? If I have a lot of people on the field, my next question I'm asking, what do they look like? Do they look engaged? Do they look like they are having fun? Do they look like they care about the sport? If they look like they're getting disengaged, they're having side conversations, they're being slow getting ready for the next setup for the activity, then I start thinking about, okay, what's the next thing I'm going to do to mix this up and to get them paying attention to what's happening on the field again. If I notice that maybe 30% or more of my fighters are off field right now, I'm going to ask myself, well, why are they off the field right now? Do I know something personally that's going on in their lives that would be why they're off the field? Or is it they don't like the activity we're doing right now? Have I been doing the same activity for a while? How can I switch it up so that I can get the people who are sitting off right now back on the field? Sometimes it's as simple as they need to know, especially for newer fighters, they need to know that someone cares if they're on the field. So you can just walk up and say, hey, come join this game. I want you in on this. And that's an easy way to get individual members to come up and be a part of what's happening to increase that engagement. But your goal is just always looking, how many people are engaged? What are the people who are actively participating? What are the facial expressions, the language, the body language? What's it telling me about how they're feeling about this activity? What activity do I need to switch to next? And how soon do I need to switch to it to maintain this level of engagement? So keep in mind, other things to keep in mind when running practice. So that's my whole spiel on engagement. Couple of the notes before I've kind of ran out of the notes of things to talk about is when running a practice, you want to phase in your new fighters. So when someone walks up to the field, you don't want to just throw them into the activity you're doing, but you want your designated person for that day. Always have someone designated for a realm practice who's in charge of approaching potential new members. So it could be someone in leadership, it could be a volunteer for the day, but someone who's in charge of going up to the new fighter and saying, hey, you look interested. Do you want to know what we're doing? And explaining the rules to them, and then fighting with them a little bit off to the side to check and make sure they understand the rules. And then not just putting them in the field, but either they themselves go and fight next to them on the field, or they find a more experienced fighter to be like, hey, Samuel, can you come? Can you fight with Billy Bob Jr. over here? He's brand new today and he could really use someone to help him fight on the field. But you don't want your new fighter to just kind of be left by themselves on the lonesome in a field that has people who've been fighting from 1 year to 15 years. And that's a good way to never see Billy Bob Jr. ever again. So you want to phase them in so that they feel comfortable and they feel like someone cares that they showed up. And as always, when running a realm practice, safety first. So you need to have, your marshal needs to be checking weapons. They need to be watching out for dangerous fighters. They need to be making sure people understand the rules of the game. And making sure people are abiding by those rules and by the code of conduct that your realm should have. If your realm doesn't have a code of conduct, you should probably establish one. And safety, because if you have an unsafe realm, people will not come back, and that will lose your engagement. So engagement's the key word. When I think about how I'm running a realm practice, I'm just looking to see, out of the number of people at my realm, 15 people, out of those 15, how many are on the field right now? If it's less than 80%, 80 to 70% of my fighters, I need to change something. Goal is 100% engagement. But if I have less than 80% of my fighters engaged on the field at any one time, that's a cue to whoever's running practice that they need to change what they're doing to increase their engagement. That's my ramble and my rant. Are there any questions?
Not necessarily a question, but from my perspective, being a non-fighter who ran a realm for a significant period of time, something that's really fun for new fighters is when you take all of the fighters who are like a year or less and put them on one side of the field, and all of the fighters who are older than that, and you give those older fighters like 15 hits each, and the side with the newer fighters has to figure out how to kill all of the older fighters without also all dying themselves. And it helps teach like that it's okay to go after those older fighters, because I find lots of newer fighters are like too scared, like, oh my goodness, that's so and so, and they've been fighting for so long, and I can't possibly go attack them, they're just gonna kill me.
Yep.
Underguard had a huge problem with that, so we started playing, I don't even know what we called it anymore, but we started doing that scenario, and it made it so that newer fighters were less terrified to go fight like our older fighters who've been fighting for like the entire time we've been around, right? And so like those little twists on things help newer fighters gain those like aggression skills that they need, especially if they're going to events, because I see a lot of times new fighters at events are like, oh my goodness, we're going to use Hakan because he's on my mind. That's Hakan. He's been fighting forever. He's a war master. I can't possibly go up against him. He's just going to crush me. And like that fear of going to fight those veteran fighters stops them from enjoying the like game.
Yeah.
Like fighting aspect. And so like I find that teaching them that it doesn't matter how long person A has been fighting, they are still a person and you could still kill them at some point. Like you could get that shot that they don't see coming, right?
Yeah, I like that idea. If I'm understanding the scenario you presented, the experienced fighters only have a limited number of shots they can throw.
No, the experienced fighters have like X number of shots they can take. So instead of like dying in the traditional sense, maybe the 6 of them that are on that side have 15 hits total as a team they can take. And the other team has to try to get those shots in before they die, essentially.
So would those hits then be hits like, if the experienced fighter blocked a shot, does that count as a hit they've taken, or does it have to go to their physical body?
It has to go to their physical body.
Okay. Well, that allows for, if you have like 25, that's a huge number, but 25 experienced fighters, you don't have to kill all 25 of them, you just have to hit them 15 times.
Yeah, essentially. So like it started out where we had a bunch of fighters who don't even fight anymore. Like we had 7 veteran fighters, and they were just destroying our field of what was mostly like a year or under fighters. So
Yep.
I had to sit down as someone who doesn't fight, but is also an educator, and go, why is no one engaged in this activity? And figure out how to make it so like those 6 veteran fighters weren't just like killing everyone in 10 minutes and starting over again.
Yeah.
So I ended up coming up with this, I don't remember what we called it, and or if it even has a name anymore. And we also had a problem where new fighters weren't like aggressively going after, like aggression in a good sense, going after other people. They were just sort of waiting to be engaged in the battle. And so we came up with this, and there was one day where I had 6 veterans and like 32 new fighters, and like somehow the veterans kept toilet bowling them and were able to kill them all. And so we had to sit down and be like, all right, don't let that happen. There are more of you than there are of them. If you guys can enclose them instead of letting them enclose you, you're gonna win. Like it taught everyone, like, yes, it's okay to go after these fighters. They're just fighters. And like how to not get trapped on a field. And like we're really lucky. Our indoor fighting field is a legal sized indoor soccer field.
Nice.
Where we were allowed like archery and everything. And so like it just took a little bit of figuring out for them to get it. And so like we used to play that game a lot, and we used to have a lot more like people coming to our practices than we do now. But it took that like twist of these veteran fighters are so good we're never going to be able to beat them, to there are more of us than there are of them. We just have to think about this more tactically. And it definitely upped engagement in and ceased the like terrifying, oh my goodness, that's a veteran fighter, I can't possibly go fight them sort of thing. So it sort of solved 2 of my problems at once.
So in fancy language, how I would phrase that was you took them who they didn't believe they could do it. They had no self-efficacy that they would be able to succeed. And you put them in a situation where they could see, oh, I can succeed. I just have to do this. And it's not even I have to kill them. It's I just have to hit them so many times.
Yeah, we have to, yeah, that's exactly what it was. But yeah, so it hit the wrong button. It worked out quite nicely, and it solved 2 of my problems at once, which I'm quite happy about. And I don't know that it's done in other places, because I don't know if we came up with that or we modified it from something else. That is a bag of chips, cat, not cat food. Please stop trying to eat it. So it'll be interesting.
I know over here at Renaissance fairs, we'll do something called Knights and Knaves, where you put, all the official Belgrim people on one side and all the Renaissance fair attendees on the other side, and we'll have them just go at each other. I like the situation where you have done it because you have a vast numbers difference between your veteran fighters and your newer fighters, which allows the newer fighters to have that feeling of possibility that they could succeed.
Yeah.
In my realm at least, we usually have, it's not as extreme as a difference between our new fighters and our veteran fighters.
Well, and then when that started to become the case, we changed the way the teams worked. So like we would put 1 or 2 of our veteran fighters on the other team, but they weren't allowed to like wield a weapon. They had to just do like they had to be the like met planner. So like, this is how you guys are going to do this, and like teach the new fighters how to do whatever it was they wanted them to do. So I modified that scenario on the fly so many times.
Yeah. And that was an adaptation that I was going to put out there, so thank you for just saying it. I know another thing I will do to help our newer fighter have that that self-efficacy of I can fight these people is I will team them up with I usually aim for a mid to high mid fighter. I don't usually try to team them up with the most experienced fighter in the realm, because half the time they're just intimidated by being teamed up with the best person. But if I team them up with a mid to high mid fighter, and I specifically tell them I have to use my good brain to think about who's a good person to team with a new fighter that will teach the new fighter, not just let the new fighter follow them around like a puppy dog. So I'm intentionally choosing someone who will kind of coach the new fighter in how to engage in a fight and encourage them to swing their weapon at the opponent and, you know, make sure that they're having fun and feel like someone is watching out for them and helping them achieve the goal, be it killing the person or ringing the bell for the scenario battle. But that's the favorite thing I like to do, is to team up our newer fighter with a more experienced fighter as a partnership and just make sure that they stay together during the fights.
Oh yeah, there are fighters in Thunder Guard who I would never team up with a brand new fighter, and then there's fighters like Tiramis, which none of you have probably met because he doesn't go to events anymore. But he was really good at teaching people how to do stuff, and so he would often get teamed up with our new fighters because he wasn't as intimidating, even though he was one of our like top tier fighters, but just the way he came across wasn't as intimidating as like partnering someone with like Kodite or Faffer, another human who none of you have probably met. But yeah, so it's just an interesting dynamic of how to figure out what is the best engagement method and what you need to do to get that engagement.
Yeah, and you have to know your realm. If you are someone who's in a position to be leading realm practices, you should hopefully have a fairly deep understanding of the population that makes up your realm and the different individuals within that population. So you should be using that information to inform your decisions. Hopefully. So we can, I don't have anything else, so we can probably go ahead and end the recording. If Sven, if you want to show the closing slide, so the recording has a nice stop point. Thank